Yeah, this is our first episode.
Oh, I'm honored. I will be your first.
You're my first.
That makes it somehow more like special.
It is very special. You can't. I'm holding back, but this means a lot to me. So thank you for making it work.
Oh, I'm so happy I did
And your
that. I
career
didn't
journey,
realize
I
all of
I
that.
can't wait for you to share it with the audience. It's people get inspired primarily by those who take a leap, who fail, who
Yes.
get up. So
Yes.
that's we want to share the authentic journey. You're rolling, right? So okay. Well, welcome. This is our first episode focused on career leadership and success. I'm very excited for our first speaker. Marina, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career journey and one fun fact that no one could guess about you by looking at your LinkedIn?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here with you at your office, gorgeous office here in New York. I'm Marina. I am executive coach for CEOs and top teams, but that's not what I have been all my career. So it's definitely a result of a career pivot that I did earlier on. And my background is essentially in business and finance. So at some point in that journey, and we'll probably get to that, I just realized my heart was not in it. And I decided to make a bold pivot that got me to where I am today. And I am having a blast.
I did some research on you, and one of the things that you said really stuck out. And I started doing research on who actually said the quote that you loved. So there was variations.
Yes.
I know
Yes.
there was variations. So Steven Spielberg said, "Listen to the whispers." The
Mm.
quote that you said is, "Listen carefully because your dreams don't scream at you; they whisper." I'm gonna say it again slowly. You said, "Listen carefully because your dreams don't scream at you; they whisper."
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the first dream that whispered at you?
I can tell you about the first dream that whispered from the moment that I actually started listening, because I realized that for the large part of my career, I just wasn't, I didn't think there was space for dreaming. I just thought that you need to do what you need to do to get ahead. And it's like, that's just kind of what having a career or a successful career looks like. And all of a sudden, having been in finance for I think close to a decade at that point, it hit me. I'm like, my heart is not in this. I'm never going to be extraordinary. And I'm not okay with living my life, working in an area where I know I will never be able to tap into my full potential. I just felt it in my, with every cell of my body. Like I knew that. And so then I said, okay, if that's not it, what is it? I had no idea. So I read a ton of books and I started kind of like doing these reflective questions. And I remember one of the books, I believe it's Design Your Life, like said, hey, what is the one thing that you can read about and just like research about for hours and you forget about the time? And for me, it was two things. One thing was personal growth. So I was like swallowing books on personal growth, like speed reading them. Like it was just, I could not read fast enough. That's how like excited I was like for like another point of view or. And it was also fashion. Like I felt like very passionate about fashion, but I didn't quite know where to take it. I was just like, what do I do with this fact, And is it really like passion? Is it just a hobby,
Is it a career potential? Yeah.
Exactly. Where do you go from there? But it was both were just whispers. None of them was like, oh my God, I woke up and it's like, you got to do this. That's it. It was just like, oh yeah, I'm interested in that. That's something I could dive into and like really enjoy. This one too. So I then decided, well, I need to explore this. So I had at a point just moved to New York and I enrolled in the Fashion Institute here in New York I believe it was called something like a personal styling course or something like that. So it was like going on for a few months.
Fun.
It was like the lightest version, but I said to myself, I need to come a step closer, because how am I supposed to assess whether personal styling is for me if
Yeah.
not to come a step closer? So I did that. And then I also enrolled in a coaching school in New York. And I remember the coaching school had this like, come for the first kind of weekend, and if you're not enjoying it, you can kind of opt out, or you stay in for the full thing, which was quite a large commitment. It was something like 9 months, and also financially quite a commitment. So I'm like, okay, this sounds doable, right? I can commit a weekend and then see what comes back. And then I did the fashion thing, I did the coaching thing, and I walked into the room with the, you know, the fashion kind of like courses and all of that. And I'm like, this is fun, but whatever. Like,
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby, you know? And then I walked into that weekend and I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is my place. I'm loving this, you know? I was just like, I could just feel it, you know? And that was it. The rest is history, essentially. But that was that moment of like, okay, out of the two that both whispered, you know, all of a sudden one started screaming. But I had to take the steps, right, to get there.
I think the number one lesson from your journey is you have to trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, sit down and listen to yourself. Write down what drives you. And it could be anything. Based on your experience, it was business, personal development, fashion, and then you took it a step further and you tested it out. It was a thesis that you then put into real practice, and then it screamed at you, right? So for our audience, lesson one is, yes, we got to do the basics, we got to go to school, we got to land, but you got to dream.
Yes.
And put it on paper, write down, listen to yourself first, and then start actually building on it.
I think the reason why it worked, if we think about it, like, I think a lot of people don't even dare to dream, you know? And I think that's really the key moment of like, in my shoes, a lot of people would have said, but what are you going to do? You're going to throw your decade of finance career out of the window and start from scratch in fashion, whoever makes a living in fashion, or like coaching, you know. Also back then it was like very kind of dodgy, like how do you actually make a living as a coach? I just basically put all those questions aside. Like you have to shut all of that down, because if you start letting that noise, which is essentially fear, right? If you let it speak, it's always gonna be the loudest voice. And I just said, I'm not gonna even think about the how. I don't care about the how right now. I'm just figuring out the what, you know, and the how we'll talk about later, you know. But it's really, really important, I think, to give yourself that permission to not let the how start, because a lot of us would maybe think about things, but then like, oh, but how is that going to work, and my kids and my mortgage and my whatever, like college loan, or, you know, all these voices come in and you stop there. So you wouldn't even take any of the steps that I just described, right? And the other thing that I want to point out, now that you were reflecting so nicely, I'm like, really the gut feeling and intuition is really important, because back then I was still relatively early in my career. My bosses were telling me that I'm awesome, that if I stay, I'm going to make this grand career, that I'm going to make, you know, this and that level in the organization, that I'm like the super high talent, things like that, right? So that makes it harder, because you're like, oh, but my gut was telling me it may be awesome for them, but I know it's like not even half of my potential.
Yeah.
And I'm not okay with that.
That's huge. I think that there's a lot of stories we tell ourselves and the fear that drives our decisions. But I think let's make it tactical. So we have a lot of people in our audience who are young professionals, and I'm sure we'll have some college audience listening in. Can you tell us, how did you land your first career gig? We all have to, you know, when we start out, the way I think about it, someone has to take a bet on us, right? And it's very tough in the economy we're today. So how did you land your first gig, and what is your advice to people who are starting out?
What I did is, right after finishing my studies, my master's in finance, I enrolled into like an international accreditation called the CFA. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like a lot of portfolio managers do it, asset managers. It has a really high reputation worldwide. And so I knew that if I can show them, it's a 3-year program. So I had no intention of like waiting to complete it before I apply for a job. But I thought if I can even show them, hey, I qualified for this, that means my university degree qualifies because you could only enroll if you had a degree. So I was being quite strategic about it, right? And then maybe show them that I passed at least the first level, which is already a big deal. You know, a lot of people give up already at that point. I'm like, that should open some decent doors. And so I moved to Switzerland and I started applying for jobs, and it was very difficult. I applied for about 100 jobs. I received about 30 rejections. The other 68 I never heard back from. So it took quite a few months, and I landed 2 interviews. One was with IBM and one was with PwC.
Amazing.
And destiny was that basically both interviews were in the same day. Like, can you imagine
The stress levels
the
of that
stress
day.
level? But like, what an interesting fact. Like after months of applying and nothing is working,
And the
all of a sudden you're
rejections
invited
and-
by 2 really nice, amazing global firms.
The meccas, yeah.
And you basically need to run from one interview to the other because they're they're taking place on the same day. And to make the story even better, I got both offers.
Amazing.
So in the end, I was the one choosing. But after months of a lot of rejections, I had moments where people would tell me, like, if you only had a different name, your resume is amazing, but your name, we're
That's
sorry.
crazy
Yeah.
to think about nowadays. Yeah.
And I think now, times are changing, luckily, but back then, for whoever is experiencing this in some shape or form, you know what? I decided not to even bother thinking about it. I just didn't let it take any of my energy away. I'm like, okay, it's a fact. It's
Yeah.
like I just built that
You
fact
can't
into
control
my
it.
process. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's gonna happen. Some people are not gonna like my name, but that's gonna be someone who's not gonna care. And in fact, I ended up working with PwC, and they welcomed me with open arms, and they're like, we love all of your diversity. Like, we love, that you're Serbian and you're here and you speak German and you also speak they just loved all of these facts that actually for a lot of others were a downside,
Yeah.
right? Or like a negative. So it's like everyone finds their place, but you have to, keep believing in yourself regardless of what the environment and what the feedback is. And just the only ones who fail are those who give up, right? It's like there is that saying, and I firmly believe in that.
100. I have the very similar journey to you. I did my psychology degree, and I thought that this is a little risque, so I need to do a business. So I ended up doing business and psychology.
That sounds familiar.
Very familiar. And then I said, okay, well, what do I do with this? So I went and got my MBA in Chicago, and I said, well, how do I make money? Finance.
Yeah.
And I got into Morgan Stanley, and someone, was kind of coaching me and saying, like, well, this is how you make your first million, and this is, the client advisory role. And I could do it. I could see it. I could see the future. But same to you, I didn't feel it in my gut. I felt like this isn't it. This isn't my thing. But I also went back to California and applied. I remember it was 433 applications. 433. And so many no's, so many rejections, so many silence. I know right now so many people are getting just ghosted, even in the final interviews, just crazy. And the biggest advice, I think, from your stories, do not believe the stories that people tell you. Keep pushing, open your own doors, and someone somewhere will see your value.
Yes, and keep shooting for the stars,
Yeah.
right? Imagine in my case, maybe someone in my shoes would have started lowering their standards and maybe went for not the IBMs and PwCs, but started going for maybe like a smaller, whatever. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but maybe in some shape or form lower the standards and go like, oh, maybe I should just go look for something else or whatever. I didn't. I just kept believing that I belonged there, and I think that's really important.
Can you take us through your journey? So you, IBM, PwC wins.
Yes.
What happens next?
PwC wins. It was a super interesting job, very international. I loved it. They loved me. It was a great start into my career. And then I finished my CFA and I moved within PwC, different departments, did a little bit of M&A, corporate finance. And at some point find myself in a place where it became a competition about who slept under the desk last night. It was just like, who's going to work longer hours, who's going to exhaust themselves more. That person is the hero. And I just felt like, okay, like this is not, it's not where I want to be.
That's not the right race to be in, yeah.
No, and it was anyway starting to get very too technical for my, what I felt were my talents and my strengths. And so I decided to actually leave that, what could have been a really prosperous career, to continue into private equity, M&A, all of this stuff, investment banking. And I just said no. And I ended up getting an opportunity to actually move to the industry, and it was something that seemed a bit boring at first, reinsurance industry. So it's like not insurance, but it's like the insurance for insurance companies. So it's like
that exists.
That exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
I learned something new today.
Yes. So
Okay.
basically, all the insurance companies are also insured.
Okay. So
And
monopoly
so-
on top
yeah.
of monopoly.
So there is a certain consolidation of risks that happens in the background, especially for some of the large risks like catastrophe, natural catastrophe, stuff like that. Of course, no single insurance company would be able to take that. So anyway, this is one of the biggest reinsurance companies in the world. Swiss Re, obviously headquarters in Switzerland. I lived there back then, and they just wanted to have a coffee chat with me. And I was rolling my eyes. I'm like, this sounds really boring. But if they want to have a chat with me, because I'm not even sure if I want to apply for the job, I'm going to go and have a chat with them. So I ended up having a chat with my then future boss, Andre, who is just this most wonderful human. And I'm like, my gut was saying yes. My gut just said yes. And on paper, it was nothing I was looking for. I was thinking like, yeah, maybe, I go into private equity and all of that. But then this just felt right. It was an opportunity to lead a team. It would have been officially my first leadership position, and also to do some really interesting things across the organization. And I said yes. And so I ended up working for Swiss Re basically for the rest of my corporate life in Zurich, then got relocated to New York, stepped out of finance into more strategic roles, went to COO's office, then went to CEO's office, did head of strategy, chief of staff role there. And it was finally in that role that I realized, having worked very closely with the management team, with the CEO, with the board, I started getting so fascinated with the topic of leadership. Like I would sit at this table and just observe. It was so fascinating to me why, the employees would follow this leader, and it's like when they ask for something, it's just done in no time, versus with some others it would just always be this drag.
Yeah.
And it's like they were really struggling people were not following, essentially, right? So they may be even direct reports, but they were not really followers. And I caught myself basically thinking more about that than about innovation, strategy, and whatever else was officially my title.
It's the human side that fascinated you. So I'm super interested. Tell me, because you've been in these meetings, you've seen the pitches, you've seen the innovation discussions. For anyone who wants to grow into that leadership role, let's put CEO aside, because I know that's a whole different discussion that is now your full career, but you've seen people that are direct reports, they're coming in and reporting or asking for something. What makes them stand out? What helps you identify that person as a true leader?
It's very interesting because obviously you see a lot there. And, I think good management teams really make it a point to have a healthy rotation of -1s, -2s, like, employees from all across the organization to be able to be exposed to talent and give them some visibility and all of that, which is all healthy practices that I support. But when you're in that room, a lot of professionals that I see, they just lack the basic briefing of what does executive presentation and executive summary actually mean. Putting yourself in the shoes of these executives who have probably received already 100-page pre-read for that meeting, and it's their 50th meeting that week. So their capacity to consume their information is extremely limited and needs to be spent wisely. And so my advice is less is more. And the other thing that really stands out is when you walk into the room and you actually have an opinion. So you walk into the room and you don't just present the data or you present a problem or you present an analysis, but you actually say, based on what you see, based on your experience, to the best of your knowledge, what is your opinion? And even if you're wrong, having the courage to have your own opinion is a leadership quality.
Do you remember any of the conversations that stood out to you? Anything that was a cool initiative or anyone that had a great presentation?
I think it's just like there were a couple of individuals that were literally part of the graduate program that I just wowed me. They would walk into the room with this confidence, and being also confident to say, if there was a question being asked, to say, hey, I don't know that, but I'm gonna check and I'll come back to you. Like, that's the one thing of like getting comfortable with not knowing. Is usually something that we learn, if we ever learn it, much later on in our career. But if we can learn that earlier, I think it's a big advantage, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with not knowing. As long as you're able to be comfortable with that and still own the action that you're going to get back to them with the answer. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So being able to be confident and to stay calm and composed and not get nervous and anxious and feel like, somehow you failed because you didn't have all the perfect answer, letting go of this idea of perfection and going in there and being okay with maybe not having all the answers. And then the other thing is also what I've noticed is those that stood out, they walk into that room not to perform. They walked into that room to actually get their perspective. They're like, I'm working on this, but I want to get your view. What would you do? What would you do? What am I missing? What else is there? As opposed to like, oh, let me just like make sure I go through the slides and I remember all my points, which
It's
is
a conversation.
It's a conversation. And it's much easier said than done. There are a lot of senior executives that I coach on that much later on in their career, right? So it's not, I'm saying that, and I understand that it's not so easy to implement, but if you can do a little bit of that, you will make a much more powerful impact in the room.
You'd be surprised. Even yesterday at a conference, I had one of the people I started at the same time with come up to me and she said, hey, I've seen that you're doing the Build Your Brand workshop. Is there a mentorship program? I said, there doesn't need to be a program. What do you want to work on? And be very specific. And she was like so afraid. And she goes, well, do you have a direct report I can work with who can help me? I said, why don't you want to work with me? And it's not because I have the time to help everyone, but I want to build that confidence in people that if you want something and you're inspired by someone, ask for the help. And it's the same thing with your, advice on looking for the job, dream big. And it's not the first conversation I'm having. And based on your story, it wasn't the most senior person in the room who came in and did a glowing presentation. These were young professionals who just had the confidence, the guts, and the authenticity to come and have a healthy discussion with a leader, which I'm sure they walked away learning way more than presenting and not hearing anything back.
Yes, they learned more. It's a win-win all around. They learned more. They made a more, lasting impression. And actually, they built a relationship. Because when we're just worried about performing, it shuts down the connection. And it doesn't build the relationship. And ultimately, you want to walk out of that room feeling like you have a little bit of a relationship with them because you were there.
So let's make it actionable.
Yes.
And you add to this. I'm just trying to summarize it in my own head.
I love your summary.
So, so when you're talking to, let's say, your direct manager, or you want to get advice from someone senior, present your points, but also be open to the conversation. How would you recommend people even start the conversation of saying, I would love to get your feedback. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's the what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can frame it. I think conversation framing is really helpful to say, hey, listen, I'm here. I'm gonna present some data, some analysis that I did, and I have my own opinion, but I also have my doubts about it, and I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Amazing.
So stay away from, I'm not a big fan of the word feedback.
Yeah.
It triggers something in our brain that feels very
negative
heavy
and heavy.
Negative. So it's like, get your thoughts, get your input. Would love to learn from your experience what you would add to this. And so it's like saying, hey, you took that. It's very important not to come in with a problem only, right? So it's like you're coming in and there was that level of proactiveness in you to think about the solution. But for various reasons, maybe your solution is not perfect, and that's completely fine. Or maybe you came up with a few options and you want to get your manager's guidance on which one is perhaps the optimal one, right? So I would say frame the conversation so that when they're listening to you, they know what they're listening for. They're like, oh, okay, now it's the analysis part. Oh, okay, now you're coming up with options that you promised you will. Okay, now we're coming to the discussion that you said you wanted to have. Perfect.
You started in finance.
Yes.
Very random pivot to insurance and leadership. Then a pivot to being a part of the C-suite office and strategic initiatives. How and when did you decide to get out and start something completely fresh and new and give us all the guidance on the actionable steps?
So I was in this strategic role that I just described, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And the longer I was in it, the more this passion for leadership grew in me. And so I could notice that, and I enrolled. That was the moment when I enrolled in the coaching school. And the one thing that I did that was right, and I would still do it the same way if I were to do it again, is I was very open with my employer about it. I said, hey, I am really passionate about this. I would love to do this. I was like engaging them in that conversation. I wasn't making it like a thing that I was just doing on the side. And they, the CEO back then who I was working with, he was very supportive. And so I did the school, I did all of that. Once I finished all of that, I said, hey, I would love to, practice, coach some people, help bring this into my work, now I can add even more value. And so I did a little bit of that. They were super open to that. They opened all the doors that they possibly could. However, had I wanted to pivot into doing that sort of full time, first of all, that rarely exists, and in that company definitely didn't exist, an internal executive coach. There's very few companies out there that have it, that are kind of at that level of maturity in terms of their leadership programs and all of that. But if I wanted to come anywhere close to that, it would have been moving into the HR department. And
that's not it.
No, that's not it. That was definitely not it for me. I knew it, and especially it was very rigid. It was kind of like, you can come, but everyone who works in HR needs to start from like doing the payments and the processes. I'm like, I want to coach people to perform, to be their best at work and in life. Like, how the hell is a payment plan? Like, figuring out how to pay out salary is going to help me with that, So there was a lot of like legacy, outdated legacy.
The structure, the
structures
hierarchy
in place that were just completely not aligned with how I wanted to do this. And so I basically mutually decided. I mean, it was not even a decision. It was obvious that at some point I will just need to step out and do this, And so the question was only when and how. And so this is where the personal branding discussion comes into play, because the moment that I realized this and the moment that I was able to kind of see the North Star of like, okay, ultimately this is what I'm going for, but I have if I have a brand, it's a brand of a finance person, you know. My LinkedIn network was just like, you know, my ex-colleagues from these two employers. It was very kind of finance heavy. I'm like, how am I going to do this? And so I started like basically repositioning myself and putting less of that finance in the forefront and putting more of the leadership thinking in the forefront. So I didn't have a title or anything. I just started writing about leadership, writing about emotional intelligence, writing about conflict, writing about whatever was top of mind. Going to conferences, again, not going to my usual finance conferences. I chose different conferences. I sometimes had to pay for them out of my pocket. I did that, right? So it's like I was taking very intentional steps on like, how do I reposition myself? I need to start adding new network, fresh network, like the one that is actually relevant for my future and not just a reflection of my past.
Yeah.
So that I can be exposed to different type of, first of all, just to be inspired. I wanted to open my LinkedIn feed and see people who are doing maybe something that I'm aspiring to, and not just seeing people who are doing what I do. That doesn't inspire me at all, right? So I did it initially for inspiration purposes, but then the more I did it, of connecting with people and really building a network, the more I realized, wow, this is also a way to create opportunities,
Yeah.
you know, because then these people are in your network. When you write about something or you attend conferences or whatever, they see that.
Yeah.
So they can start
They
keeping you in mind for potentially opportunities. And I started getting speaking opportunities, you know. I started getting invited for panels. Like, I was still in insurance, so it would be an insurance conference, but they wanted me to come talk about leadership, you know, and so dots started to connect, but I had to like be very proactive about, hey, I need to
You
make
were very
this
intentional.
pivot exactly before I actually make the move.
Yeah.
And I did that for about, I want to say 2 years.
Okay.
2 good years of like just investing in my brand.
And most of this was on LinkedIn
Yes,
articles,
LinkedIn,
anything else practical.
conferences. I was publishing articles wherever I could. I applied to be a judge for, you know, in the coaching industry. There is a body, governing body, and they were doing this like awards for like the company with the most that has a golden standard in coaching, and I was engaged with as a judge on their, you know, panel. And so I just looked for super creatively for opportunities of like, what could I do that I can learn from, right? That is not a job, because I'm not ready to change the job. So
Yeah.
what are some of those little things and projects I can do outside of my job that are going to give me this experience and exposure, but also that are going to on paper give me some extra credentials, and so that once I'm ready to make the move, that move is easy, right? That move doesn't look like, oh, you just finished coaching school and now you want to come coach. It doesn't work like that, you know. And then secondly, what I did, and you know, maybe we can dive a little bit more in the branding journey, but what I did is I found a way to connect my past with my future. So instead of just, you know, positioning the coaching, I actually started connecting, you know, business with coaching and why, you know, business mindset matters in coaching. And so I started kind of connecting the two in a way that they basically completely blend together, and it became a part of my brand. And you're gonna love this. I did this for 2 years. When I finally made the move, I said, there was no role out there, by the way. If you want to apply as an executive coach, I mean, it's really difficult. Like, there's very few companies that do this on a top level, and there was basically no opening, but I was ready. So what I did is I reached out. I had in mind the top 4 that I want to be a part of,
Okay.
potentially. I reached out to all 4 of them asking to have a coffee chat. All 4 of them wanted to have a coffee with me.
So you 4 executives that you admired and you wanted to talk to, or
No, 4 top executive coaching companies
Got
that I
it.
wanted to work for.
Got it. Okay.
So it's kind of like the big 4 of the
Yeah.
accounting. These are the big 4 of the executive coaching and leadership development world. And so I reached out, and just the fact that they wanted to have a coffee with me, and bear in mind, I reached out to the partner, like the top partner of the practice. It wasn't like the fact that they wanted to spend the time to meet me means my positioning was on point.
Your brand was
Yeah,
ready.
it was there.
Yeah.
And I remember having one of these conversations, and because I reached out to this basically the president of the company, we were in the corner office. It was here in Manhattan. I remember he was sitting on one couch and I was on the sofa next to him, and he said, "So, Marina, when I look at your profile, you can pretty much do everything that we do in our portfolio. What is it that you want to do?" And he basically gave me a task to walk away. I remember it was Friday, and take the weekend to basically think about it and write my own job
I
description.
love that.
I remember walking out of that office, Olga, and I was like crying. I was like such a,
You
it
got
was
the
a moment
moment.
where it all came together. Like all my work, my intention, it was not easy to do all of this on top of your
Course.
everyday job. It was not
Course.
easy. It meant that I didn't go out. I was, doing my stuff on the weekends, working on my future. I was not, scrolling down my feed. And you know what I mean? Like it took a lot to get there. But I was rewarded big time. And I ended up basically having conversations with two of them about a concrete opportunity and working for one of them, which was Hydric and Struggles, which was an amazing experience. But yeah, my interview process was, I was having chats with these people. There was no process. Like for them, it was so obvious that I can do this.
Because you put yourself out there, you build the brand,
Yeah.
you had the credibility in your articles and the experience. It was like, you don't have to prove anything to ours anymore. You just
No.
gotta pick where you want to focus. Yeah,
Yes, it
that's
was more a
amazing.
conversation of like, where do you fit? What would this look like? What exactly would be your level within the organization and all of that. But, I think also what shouldn't be underestimated is like having done all of this work, I was already there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Without having had a lot of like formal official coaching under my belt, I was there because I was immersing myself in that world for such a long time already that when the time came, that's the energy that is palpable, that people feel. It was not something that was, a far kind of goal for me. It was there. I totally believed that I deserve it and that I belong. But it was because I did all of that work that prepared me for that.
Yeah, and I think the biggest lesson from here, and this is a consistent misconception I see, is you don't need to have millions of dollars of an investment to start something. You don't need to have someone backing you to start something.
No.
You're just knocking on doors. You're very intentional in what you put out. And then you ask very direct questions. And you and I were talking about this, the economy is so insane right now that putting yourself open to work on LinkedIn is not enough.
No.
You have to be very specific in what
Yes.
you're looking for.
Yes.
Otherwise, as you said, you're exhausting your network
Yeah.
for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And you get one ask, really, in your career
That's it.
to make it right. So based on everything you shared with us, it's being intentional is so important. And going with your gut, I feel like your entire journey is you listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the conversation, for the wisdom. And I think number one lesson from today is trust your gut, stay silent, listen to yourself, and then reach for the stars. Thank you so much, Marina.
Olga.
Such a good conversation. Thank you. Oh, that was